Hi guys, so there have been quite a few films and TV shows over the years that have used the word Bloodlines in their subtitles. There was a cheap Day of the Dead sequel that did it. I haven't seen that film, but I don't think it reviewed very well. And there was also a failed Supernatural spin-off called Bloodlines. But how did the fifth Tremors film get on when it tried to use Bloodlines? Let's find out. So before we get into it, the usual reminder that you'll find all my other Tremors reviews in my Tremors playlist, and there will be spoilers today, as much as you can spoil a Tremors film. So this is just as much a revival as it is a sequel. It came out 11 years after the first one. Michael Gross probably thought this franchise was dead in the interim years, but he's back again to play Bert. So we're in the present day again. We're not carrying on with the Old West storyline. So at the start of this, Bert is doing some sort of survivalist documentary series. It's just him and one cameraman. It's not a big operation particularly. But seemingly there is not enough graboid action on a week-to-week basis for him to only hunt graboids. So he's got this little side hustle going on. But at the start of this, two things happen within the space of about 10 minutes. So firstly, a guy turns up to tell Bert that a new graboid problem has arisen in South Africa, of all places, and also Bert's long-lost son turns up, a guy called Travis, played by Jamie Kennedy, although we don't actually find out it's his son until much later in the movie, bizarrely. But once they're acquainted, Bert and Travis become companions and go off to South Africa to tackle the new bloodline that has clearly sprung out of somewhere under the ground down there. I've seen a lot of TV shows and films recently film in South Africa, set their stories down in that neck of the woods. Without researching it, I can only imagine that it is quite cheap to film in South Africa, and logistically maybe it's easy for film crews to operate down there, I don't know. But by being set in South Africa, this film does at least have a new savannah type look to it, which makes a change from the usual desert scenarios that we get. Jamie Kennedy's an interesting casting because he's quite a big name to bring in at this point. At least he's big in horror circles. He's probably not quite a household name, but obviously he got quite a bit of recognition for his role in the early Scream films. So I guess this is his second tilt then at joining a long-running franchise, but he won't get the same fame out of this as he did with Scream. For one thing, Scream's a bigger franchise anyway, but also with Scream, Kennedy got in at the right end. You know, he was there from the beginning. He played a very popular character in the really big Scream films that everybody's seen many times over. With Tremors, he's getting in at completely the opposite end, you know, the late sequels that probably not a lot of people will catch. I mean, he did two of these. He's in 5 and 6, and yet not a lot of people will know he's in these films, whereas you say the name Tremors and you instantly think of Kevin Bacon, who only did one Tremors film in comparison. Moving on to talking about the director, this was done by a guy called Don Michael King. He sounds like a boxing promoter, but he ain't. But if you go on his filmography, he seems to have found a little niche for himself in doing direct-to-video sequels. So he's done Jarhead 2, Field of Fire. I like the first Jarhead. I've got it on Blu-ray. I didn't even know there was a second film. Not that I'm interested in watching it. He's also done Kindergarten 2, Death Race Beyond Anarchy, The Scorpion King, Book of Souls. I dread to think what number Scorpion film that is. Bulletproof 2, a film so good it doesn't have its own wiki page, even though it came out 2 years ago. And he also did Tremors 6 and 7. So I guess we are very much now at the start of the Don Michael King era. So if you watch Tremors 5 and you don't enjoy it, maybe you perhaps need to have a think about whether to carry on with 6 and 7. I must confess that this was my second viewing of this film. I saw it for the first time many years ago, and I remembered quite enjoying it, but this time I didn't quite have as good an experience. Last night when I was rewatching it, my concentration was flitting in and out, which isn't ideal if you're about to do a review of the film that you're supposed to be watching. Very late on in this, we see some baby snake-type graboids in this clearing, and I honestly didn't recognize them from any other point of the movie, so I thought to myself, where did they come from, and why is Bert not surprised to see this brand new variation of graboids? So I don't know if they were introduced a little bit earlier and I just didn't realize for whatever reason. But on the whole, this movie is very much a greatest hits of all the various Tremors creatures we've had in the past. So it's kind of like the Resident Evil retribution of the Tremors series, if you like. we get graboids, we get shriekers, we get ass blasters, but we don't really get anything new. But I'm fine with that because I'm less concerned with whether we get wacky new variations of what's come before, and I'm more interested in whether we get proper practical effects. If you've seen all my Tremors reviews up to this point, you'll know that I'm very particular about whether we get practical stuff or digital stuff. Tremors 5, sadly, is packed full of CGI. In fact, it's almost completely CGI based. It's like the only reason they felt they were able to bring these films back at this point is because they felt they could do them with all that modern type CGI that seemingly can be done in great volume for a reasonably cheap price. To give it its due, the CGI you see here is at least of a better quality than some of that really early era CGI that is in Tremors 3. Some of that stuff is absolutely dire. There is some semblance of quality with what you get in Tremors 5, but nothing really has any weight in this film when it comes to the graboids. It's just none of it feels very real, you know. I really miss the puppetry. None of the kills in this are very good. There are constant cutaways before people die, or maybe we'll just see close-ups of their screaming, struggling faces, but we won't actually see what's happening to their bodies. There's this one kill where, well, it's a couple of kills in the same scene, actually. So there's this archaeological dig pairing who have just found these new bones and they want to celebrate. So they jump in the shower together. It's not an indoor shower, it's an outdoor setup. There's like a curtain around them. They're in the grasslands, it's outdoors. A graboid comes up and gets them just as they've started kissing in this shower. They're still fully clothed at this point. But this could have been one of the great kills of the franchise, because I don't think we've ever had a situation before where two people have gone into a graboid mouth at the same time. But you just don't see anything with this kill. Like, it's just a close-up of people screaming and yelling. Now, what I think is happening here is that two different graboid tongues have grabbed these characters separately and they're sort of being pulled down side by side, but you wouldn't know it. You've literally just got to guess what's going on, really. But it's such a shame. This could have been one of those really classic lovers dying in the thralls of passion type deaths, like what you get in A Bay of Blood and Friday the 13th Part 2, and doubtless there are other examples. Another classic thing that is very prominent in the earlier Tremors films is the camaraderie between the main characters, and again, that's not quite as good here. I thought that it would be, with somebody like Jamie Kennedy coming on board. I mean, pairing him up with Michael Gross's Burt Gummer just seems like a match made in heaven on paper, because Jamie Kennedy, as an actor, he's a very talky, wordy kind of guy, even off camera. If you look at the outtakes of this on the Tremors 5 Blu-ray disc, most of them involve Kennedy, because he's constantly trying ad-libs and experimenting with the lines he's been given. He's throwing in little bits of this and that aren't in the script, but they're just coming to him on the fly. He's a very clever man, but he can't quite fix the dialogue in this. It's just not written skillfully enough. It's not that the relationship between Burt and Travis is bad. I still enjoyed their chemistry to a point, but when you compare it to what you get earlier on in the franchise with Val and Earl in the first film, it's not even on the same plane. And even though I would say the Earl Grady combination in Tremors 2 was worse than what you get here, Tremors 2 could make up for it by falling back on the Earl-Burt partnership. So yeah, I'm sad about the fact that they couldn't quite pull it off here between Jamie Kennedy and Michael Gross. I suspect the two actors had a good chemistry. I mean, they did. They were happy to bring them back to do another film after this, but they just couldn't nail the lines in this. There's not one moment of dialogue in Tremors 5 that I can remember as being really clever and funny, and it puts a smile on my face to look back on it. But with the earlier films, I could relay to you several instances of really funny things that were said and spoken. If you've got a situation where you can't do practical effects because it's just going to cost too much money, I can sympathise with that. But when it comes to the scripts and the dialogue, no excuses there. If you know you're having to rely on CGI monsters, then you better focus on the things that you can control and make that as good as possible, and they don't do that in this. Another thing that puzzles me about Travis and Bert in this film is the fact that they leave it so late to have Travis tell Bert that he's his son. Surely this should have been the emotional arc of the whole movie, Bert realising he's a father and dealing with that at the same time he's trying to sort out the graboid problem. But by only being informed of this so late in the day, he doesn't really have much time to process it. I mean, they do end this film quite close, these two characters, but again, it's just an example of not getting right everything that they could have got right about this movie. I do have some positive things to say. So there is this outstanding scene in the middle of the story where Bert gets thrown into an empty lion cage by the main antagonist, and he's just left to starve to death, basically, to rot away under the glare of the afternoon sun. It's the one time in this movie where I feel like the writers have genuinely had a big spark of inspiration. Bert starts hallucinating in this cage. It's kind of funny. He mentions Heather, his ex-wife, at one point. There's another moment where he gets his own urine and douses himself in it to keep the flies off him. Just the sort of thing that I would expect Bert to come up with in a scene like this. But most of the rest of the movie is just Bert, Travis and the South African contingent running around trying to avoid getting killed by digital effects, really. Some of those side characters are quite good. There's this one guy who's a helicopter pilot who's very funny, although at one point he appears to die, and at that moment I thought it was the best death in the movie, actually. But then later on we find out he didn't die because he shot his way out of the graboid's belly or something. And of course we don't get to see that. It happens off camera somewhere, more frustration. There's another character who's like a South African heavy. He thinks he's a lot tougher than the American characters, but actually he's just a coward and a wuss, and fittingly he dies halfway through the movie. He's reasonable value. I've also got to give a bit of praise to the start and the end of this film, because we kick things off by seeing a trailer of Bert's survival show, and it's really, really funny. And if you do decide to watch Tremors 5, if you haven't seen it already, make sure you stick around for the mid-credit scene that comes on, because we get to see another trailer for Bert's survival show, except this time he's woven his son into it, and actually the second version is even funnier than the version we see at the start. I think as long as you wait around for this very last scene, I think your score for this film might actually go up by as much as half a point or a full point. It's a pretty good way to finish things off. But overall, this is definitely a mixture of the good, the bad and the ugly for me. It's a weird mix, this film. There's tons of things that are wrong with it. There's some entertainment to be had, but it's certainly not essential viewing, even for people who would call themselves Tremors fans. Time to show you the version of the film that I've got. Here is my Blu-ray copy of Tremors 5 Bloodlines. There's a really high quality HD look to this. South Africa as a location looks absolutely fantastic in this film. There are some special features on this, so there are some deleted and extended scenes, and some of them I wish they'd left in. There are a few dialogue moments between Travis and Bert which I kind of feel they could have left in there. There's also a good action sequence that has been cut out where basically Bert's driving over a bridge and Travis ends up going into the water, and I think there might even be a graboid in the water, but I can't know for sure because they haven't finished off the effects shots for this scene. But it's a shame that that couldn't have been finished and left in the movie. There's also a few outtakes that you can look at. It might give you 3 or 4 minutes of entertainment, I suppose. There's also a little documentary called Tremors 5 Behind the Bloodlines. Now, by the time I got to this one, I just had to turn it off because I was too tired to watch anymore. But I did at least go into this documentary briefly just to see how long it was. It turns out it's only 8 minutes long, so I guess it's more of a featurette than a proper documentary. You're probably not going to learn too much on that. But there are some features, at least, you know, albeit not as many as you would find on a more, say, special edition type Blu-ray. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this one. So I've got 1, 2, 2.5 bloody axes out of 5. So this one is neither really good or really bad. It's just a kind of middle of the road Tremors movie, really. So I'll be back soon to do Tremors 6. Will that one be an improvement over this one, or will we go even further in the opposite direction? Only time will tell. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.